right, how's everybody doing? Great. If you will, open your Bibles up to John chapter 5. John chapter 5. So, where has Jesus been spending most of his time recently? Yeah, Capernaum. Capernaum, right up here on the edge of the Sea of Galilee. Now, he's been making some tours in Galilee and preaching in different synagogues there in Galilee, but Capernaum has been where he has been mostly. What we're going to see in John chapter 5 and verse 1 is that there was a feast of the Jews, and where do most of the Jews go on the important feast? Jerusalem. And so Jesus goes to Jerusalem. Now, we don't know exactly when this took place because it doesn't tell us what feast is under consideration here. And there were three feasts that all of the Jews went to Jerusalem every year. We don't know which of these feasts that it was. So we don't know exactly what time. There's nothing in the rest of the Gospels that I know that locked down the time. But the subject matter of what takes place here in this story fits with the subject matter that is taking place kind of in this period of time. So what we're going to do tonight, more than a chronological study of events, is we're going to kind of topically group some different stories together that focus on something that Jesus is trying to teach the Jews and their misunderstanding. And so we'll see this as we go through. Anything you want to say in the way of introduction?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. So chapter 5 and verse 2. Now there was in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in the Hebrew Bethsaida, having 5 porches. Let me give you a little bit of information about this. So if you look at a drawing of the city of Jerusalem, you've got the temple here, you've got the temple complex here. On the north side of that, by the sheep gate, by the way, why would you think they would call that the sheep gate? That's right. So the sacrifices, when you would bring a sacrifice, you would bring your sheep. They would kind of stockpile the sheep out here and bring them in. And near that is the pool of Bethesda. What did I say? Did I say Bethsaida earlier? It's both? Okay, thank you. Of Bethesda. We know where that is. You can go there today, and here's a model of it in the Israeli Museum. There's a to scale model of the temple complex, actually the whole city of Jerusalem. And this is where, so here would be the fortress of Antonio, which is going to be right here on the north side. This would be the temple complex. This would be the sheep gate, probably right in here somewhere. And this is what they think that it looked like. We can go there today and see the place. It's a pool of Bethesda. It was a place of storing water. Actually, it was a cistern. You know what a cistern is? Yeah, it's a big pit dug to collect water. And what they would do is they would collect water. This was kind of a reserve for if they were ever besieged or something like that. That's the reason why it's so deep. You can go there today and still see where it was. But at this time, there were 5 porches that were there. And it tells us that a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, and paralyzed, were waiting for the moving of the water. And the angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred the water, when whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease that he had. Does everybody's version that they're reading from have that in there? Okay, what are you reading from? The ESV. So some translations, some of the text do not have that section in there. And it really doesn't add anything to this story as much, except maybe explaining why all of these sick people were gathered here in this location. But some texts don't have that detail included in there. But verse 5 says, a certain man was there who had an infirmity. How many years? That's a long time to be sick. And whatever this infirmity was made him where he was not capable of moving himself around, because Jesus came up to him and saw, by the way, it mentions how many years he had been this way. And then it says Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been in that condition a long time. And so twice it's brought up that this has been a long time. Do you think that's going to be a problem for Jesus? That somebody's been sick this long with this problem? No. And maybe that's the point. It's like, sometimes when we think of we're first diagnosed with something, we first have a symptom, well, maybe there's a solution to it. When you've lived with it for 38 years, it's kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get over this. I don't know if there is a solution to it. Well, that is not going to matter to Jesus. Jesus can heal. So Jesus comes up to him and says, do you want to be made well? Does this guy know who Jesus is? We don't know. There's no indication in the text that he does. And so Jesus says, do you want to be made well? And he doesn't seem to look to Jesus and say, well, sir, you can make me well. What's his explanation? I can't be made well because nobody will help me into the water. I don't have anybody to help me into the water. And so, no, I mean, I would love to be well, but that's not going to happen because I can't do this. And so Jesus said to him, rise, take up your bed, and walk. Okay, now we've already seen several occasions where the power to heal was somewhat conditional upon the person's faith. If you are willing, if you will believe, you'll see that in some of Jesus' statements. That's not in this one. It seems to me, and I think this is important to recognize, because you'll hear modern faith healers talk about that if someone can't, if their attempt to heal someone failed, whose fault is it? It's their fault because they didn't have the faith to be healed. All right? Did that stop Jesus? See, the person's faith, now there were times where Jesus made that conditional. Let it be according to your faith. But there are other times where it didn't matter if they believed or not. He could do it. And I think this is one of those occasions that show that. Now, let's stop right here and notice something. How many sick people were here? A lot. How many did he heal? Just one that it shows. This is interesting too, because I think sometimes people have the idea that what Jesus did is every time he saw someone that needed healing, he just immediately healed them. But that was not the case. That's not really what he came for. The purpose of healing was to show something, and he healed this person in particular to show something. What was unique about this person? All right, first of all, been sick for so long, everybody would know his condition. What's something else about him? He can't do it himself, all right? We haven't really gotten far enough into the story yet, but maybe I was thinking maybe you... Yeah, it is the Sabbath day. And what's unique about this guy? All right, yes. With this guy, he's laying on a bed, something that can be toted on the Sabbath day. All right, so that was what was significant. That's the reason why Jesus chose this guy, I believe. And so verse 9 says, immediately the man was made well, and he took up his bed, and he walked, and that day was the Sabbath. All the things that y'all said were true. They factor into this story, but none of that would have mattered if there wasn't something that this guy was doing that caught the attention of those Pharisees and scribes that were there. And Jesus chose a man who would be able to get up and walk and have to carry his bed on the Sabbath day, which verse 10 says, the Jews therefore said to him who was cured, it's the Sabbath, it's not lawful for you to carry your bed. So Jesus chooses to do something that would create a problem in the mind of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, or the Pharisees and the scribes. You have anything you want to add up to this point?
Just thinking about the whole idea of Jesus healing this man. So I think they maybe had recognized, I don't know if they could see the angel or what was going on there, but it was at least the divine power they recognized to get in this pool and to be healed. It's something Jesus could do with mere words. And so I think there would be acknowledgement there that, hey, here's divine power as well, maybe even more so. But I was listening back to some of the older classes, and somebody made the comment from the crowd that it's interesting that here's this man that's probably well known. You know, he's had this health issue for 38 years, and it seems like their immediate focus is, you know, he's breaking the Sabbath law. You know, and they're not amazed by his miraculous improvement, but maybe they're focused on that. And maybe you could lend them some credit. There is some genuineness there that they are concerned with God's law, but it's interesting that they seem to almost be quick to jump to be hypocritical instead of saying, you know, what happened? How is this? What's going on? Asking questions as opposed to just pointing fingers right away.
Very good. So let's talk about this breaking of the Sabbath here. This man is carrying his bed on the Sabbath. What did the law say about the Sabbath? All right, it's a day of rest. Okay. All right, keep it holy. Set it aside as a special day. You're not to do any work on this day. You're not to kindle a fire on this day. You're not to bear any burden on this day. Okay, so you get the picture from those passages of what's intended. God did not intend the seventh day to be a day that you went about your daily activities just like any other day. You didn't go out and work as usual. It was a day of rest. It was a day of rest. And for the Israelites, it was a day to remember that they had been slaves in Egypt and had no rest, but now God had given them rest. Now, what the Jews had done is they had made all of these specifications about what you could and couldn't do on the Sabbath. And I don't know if you've heard some of these before. If you go over there today, it's still very, very interesting. So if you all the elevators in Israel today are automated so that on the Sabbath day, they stop at every floor and open, because pushing a button would constitute work, and you can't do that. So they make all the elevators on Saturday do that. Now, before they had where they could automate the elevators, you know what they would do? They would have a Gentile operate the elevator for them because they couldn't push the button. And so it's very interesting, the things that they can and can't do today. But even in this time, there were all kinds of laws. Bob Waldron in his book makes one that I think is hilarious. So if you were wearing false teeth, if you were wearing them on the Sabbath day for appearance sake, that was okay. But if you were wearing them to help you eat, that was not okay, because that was grinding, and you couldn't be grinding on the Sabbath day. And he makes another one about if your house is on fire, you couldn't take anything out of your house if it was on fire, except something that was necessary in order to keep the Sabbath. However, you could put on as many clothes as you could wear and go outside and take them off and run back in and put on more clothes and take them out. So they had all of these laws. Now let me ask you, were those God's laws? They were their laws. Let me ask you, do you think Jesus told this man to break the Sabbath, to break God's law? No. So when this man is carrying his bed, he's not breaking what God intended for the Sabbath. But he is breaking the laws of the Pharisees that they have set up, and they call him on it. Jesus did this intentionally to set up this discussion about, all right, do we have the right understanding here of God's laws? And it's going to lead into, who is Jesus to have the right understanding of these laws? In other words, do you believe the religious leaders here, or do you believe Jesus, who has the authority to really say what God intended by these laws? So that is the setting. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is going to have to do with that setting of figuring out, does Jesus have the authority to say what God intended to be done on the Sabbath or not? And so we'll see as we get into that. Yes, sir.
I think you made a good point there. And also on that same point, Jesus is almost giving the Pharisees and whoever else a chance to have a deeper understanding of what God's law is. And he's given them the opportunity to question for that reason, I think.
Yes.
And they neglect it. They're looking too much into themselves or at their own status, you might say.
Yes.
But I believe Jesus is trying to give them, just like he does us, the opportunity to learn and understand and grow.
That's right. Excellent point. Excellent point. All right. I've spoken. You take whatever you'd like to take there.
All right. So the man was healed and he was carrying his mat. So why was he doing this? Because Jesus told him to. Verse 11. So when they accused him about carrying his bed, he answered and said, "He who made me well said to me, take up your bed and walk." And Lonnie just mentioned authority. It almost seems that he was saying, a man with power and authority told me to do this. And this is my condition, and he healed me, and he told me to do this, so I'm going to listen to him. And I think that's a good idea for him to listen. And so they have a counter question. Well, who was it? In verse 12, they essentially ask. And does the man give him an answer? He didn't know. Verse 13, but the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. So we didn't know, and they didn't get a clear-cut answer. However, verse 14, afterward Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." So I want to stop and think about this for just a moment. So we already talked about the significance and the severity of these health issues he was dealing with. So how many years did it say it was? 38. So when you read some of these passages, at least when I read some of them, I think, well, that's a pretty long time. And then I stop and think about it. that's over a decade longer than I've been alive. I think maybe a decade more than Abe's been alive. So this is a pretty significant amount of time that this man has been dealing with these things. But yet Jesus says, sin no longer, lest something worse comes upon you. And so we know, we have a pretty good idea here about judgment and what can happen. And we have descriptions of hell in the Bible, and they're pretty severe. We get descriptions there. But I think maybe what Jesus is doing is he's giving this man and maybe others around him a physical example that they can comprehend a little bit better. They can recognize this 38 years was very drastic. It was very difficult, and it was a burden on this man. But there's something far worse that can happen. Is if you don't repent and turn away from sin and receive my word, there can be something far worse. So I think he's giving us a more relative example to understand the consequences and the seriousness of sin if we don't turn away from that. And the man, he takes this word and he does go and inform the Jews that it was Jesus who made him well. So they get the idea of who it was. And I think it's important that they know who did it. And like Creighton was saying, I think Jesus is giving them a deeper understanding by revealing himself through this man to them and the things that have happened.
So what do they take away? Finding out Jesus did this, what do they take away about Jesus? They don't like him. He commanded somebody to break our rules. All right. What should have really struck them? He just healed somebody that hasn't been able to function in 38 years. Wow, what power. It's like they're oblivious to that. And they trip over that in this idea that he said to do something contrary to our rules. And so for this reason, verse 16, the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Sabbath. Now, what we're going to have really in the rest of John chapter 5 is Jesus making his defense for why he has the authority to say what is breaking the Sabbath and what is not breaking the Sabbath. Because that's what they really need to understand. It's not the issue of the Sabbath day that's so important. It's the issue of who Jesus is. And their respect for the Sabbath could bring them, as Creighton was saying, to a deeper knowledge of who Jesus is if they'll let it. And so he's going to give the evidence as he goes through here of why he could say this and what they should take from this. So, starting in verse 17, Jesus answered and said, "My Father has been working until now, and I have been working." Let me ask you this. Does spiritual work still take place on the Sabbath day? Yes. God still works on the Sabbath day. And that's what Jesus is making the point of here. My Father has been working until now. The question is, does God approve of what Jesus did? And who works on the Sabbath day? What kind of work is done on the Sabbath day? Well, God's work is done on the Sabbath day. That's the work that Jesus is doing. But what do the Jews think about this? Why? Yes. So now they have another problem. All right. Not only does he break our rules, but he claims to be the Son of God, making himself equal with God. And so blasphemy. So now they have two charges against him. And so Jesus is going to answer that charge as well as he goes through here. You want to take it? Yes.
I know, and I don't think you're wrong in saying it this way, but you said they have a problem with him breaking their rules. And I don't know if they would have viewed it that way.
No, they wouldn't.
So I think they might, this is they were working on breaking the Sabbath. And the reason I bring this up is because I think maybe sometimes we get the idea that they are, like, this generation is the one that made the rules, and they know they're made up, but they're acting like they're God's rules. And I don't know if that's the case. I think probably what they're doing is they're saying, well, these are the traditions that have been handed down with the Sabbath, and they actually, I think probably to some extent, really do think this is what God intended. And so when Jesus is not doing it, I think they're thinking he is breaking God's intention for the Sabbath day in some ways. Now, again, what you're saying is that that's not reality, and that's what Jesus is trying to point out.
Right.
But I do think that's interesting to think. They probably didn't, like, I don't know, in my mind, I think, well, they knew they were doing wrong. I don't know if they did all.
Yeah. They had elevated their traditions to the point of God's commandments so much that that's the way they viewed them. I think. Right. Yes, that's right.
So Jesus isn't going to deny the accusations within the persecution. He's not going to say, whoa, 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 hang on. I'm not equal with the Father. In fact, he's going to lean into it. And I think he's going to lean into it by basically, throughout this case, say, I'm in line with the Father, and help them understand his relationship and his role with the Father. And so verse 19, then Jesus answered and said to them, most assuredly I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself but what he sees the Father do. For whatever he does, the Son also does in like manner. So the things I do are from him, essentially is what he's saying. We are equal. The things I do are from him. The things the Son does are from the Father. He goes on, verses 21 and 22. For as the Father raises the dead and gives life to them, even so the Son gives life to whom he will. For the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son. And so we see how the Father and the Son are working together, that life and judgment I administer is also from him. And I say I, not me, but Jesus as I. The judgment and the life that Jesus can give is also the same power as the Father, and the Father's entrusting him to these things. So these things are in unison with the Father, and they're God approved. These things are from God. And so why is this so? I think maybe verses 20 and 23 help out with that. So verse 20, for the Father loves the Son. And verse 23, that all should honor the Son just as they honor the Father. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. And so I think Jesus is saying, this is my role. God has entrusted me with these things, and to accept me is to accept the Father. And then there can be life in that. But to reject me is to reject the Father, and there can come judgment from that, all the same.
So two things that are mentioned here, life and judgment. Both of those only belong to God. God's the only one who can give life. God's the only one that has the right to judge. Jesus is claiming the right to do both of those things. So as you were saying, he really leans into that. And it's based upon this. Does God approve of Jesus? How do you know that? He said it, and he just used his power to heal this fella. And so, yes, it's obvious there. So here's the thing that they need to understand. They're going to be able to see that the power of life has been entrusted to Jesus. They're going to have to trust that judgment is entrusted to him. And that is key. He's going to be the one to judge them. They need to understand that. How can they come to believe that he has the right to judge them and that his words will judge them? It's going to be by looking at the fact that he has power of life to heal, to raise from the dead, all of those things. And so he's presenting that out there. As Creighton was saying, he's trying to teach them a fundamental lesson here. And he's springboarding off of this idea of whether he has authority to heal on the Sabbath day or not. And so he's bringing this idea of life and judgment into that as well. So verse 24, most assuredly I say to you, he who hears my words and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life. But he who does not shall come into judgment, but has passed, and shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death to life. Most assuredly I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear shall live. For as the Father has life in himself, he has granted the Son to have life in himself, and has given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming, which all who are in the graves will hear his voice and come forth, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. I can of myself do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is righteous, because I do not seek my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. You should understand that I am the Son of God, because I'm claiming that, and God is approving of what I'm claiming by the work that he is doing through me. And you must understand that, because life is depending upon you understanding that. Judgment is depending upon you understanding that. And so that seems to be the case that he's making here as he goes through.
I think about verse 30, where, the accusation is, well, he's blaspheming God. Well, Jesus saying, I'm quite literally just doing what God's will is. I'm maybe doing the opposite of what you're saying. I'm carrying out God's will. I'm not blaspheming at all. And I want to share this verse to kind of build off an idea you mentioned just a moment ago about, how can he prove that he has this approval by God and this connection to God? Well, by these signs and the things he's doing. And it's interesting as we go through tonight, how many times we're going to see people rejecting that idea and it making them angry. But we have seen in the past where people have logically and clearly seen Jesus doing this and associating this with being approval from God and being power from God. So going back to John 3, thinking about Nicodemus, when he approaches Jesus, he says, we know that you have come from God as a teacher, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with you. And so then I think about passages right here where people are seeing the same thing Nicodemus saw, and maybe even just Nicodemus heard, but they're rejecting it and they're not accepting it. And I think it reveals some things about their hearts in these moments.
Yeah, I mean, is that this not the real issue? Is pride that's taking place here? Because we see with Jesus, he circulates amongst the people, common people. These people do not. These people are elevated. This was clergy before there was clergy. If Jesus would have came with power and pomp and prestige, they would have probably been more inclined to accept him. But he's lowly, he's humble, he's becoming as a common, and they can't stoop to that.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yep.
I mean, they're seeing the same evidence as everybody else.
Right.
It's there for everyone to see.
Yeah.
It's just they just can't stoop.
Yeah.
Even for us.
Yeah. When people reject Jesus today, what is at the heart of it? Pride. They we've talked about before. They don't want a Lord. They don't want somebody to rule over them, and that's true.
I do like the idea in verses 29, or in verse 29. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. I think it highlights that it's not just a mere belief, but it's a complete attitude. Either you're committing yourself to good, the resurrection of life, or you're turning away from it and you're choosing evil, the condemnation. So I think there's a highlighting there of obedience with faith as a response to Jesus embedded within that.
So we're about to bring this to court. Jesus' claims to court that he's the Son of God. Now, according to Jewish law, if somebody was brought to court, what were they pronounced guilty or innocent of on? The testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, Jesus has claimed that he's the Son of God. How many witnesses is that? 1. All right, that's 1. So here's what Jesus says. If I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true. Okay? So, granted, I understand why you would say, no, I don't know if we believe that or not. Because if you only have 1 witness, that makes sense. There is another who bears witness of me, and I know that the witness which he bears of me is true. You have sent to John. Which John are we talking about? John the Baptist. And he has borne witness to the truth. Yet I do not receive testimony from men, but I say these things that you may be saved. In other words, if you want me to call another witness that you have already heard from, I could call John. Because what did John say about me? Yeah. But let's not even deal with man's testimony here. And so Jesus is about to call on a greater witness than John. He says in verse 35, John was a burning and shining lamp, and you were willing for a time to rejoice in his light. But did these people really accept John? No, not these people. They didn't. But that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Verse 36, but I have a greater witness than John's. For the works which the Father has given me to finish, the very works that I do bear witness of me that the Father has sent me. You've actually already seen and heard from the second witness. And that is, you see this man who had this infirmity walking whole and well, which is a testimony that I am the Son of God. The works bear witness of me. Verse 37, and the Father himself who sent me has testified of me. You have neither heard his voice at any time nor seen his form. But you do not have his word abiding in you because whom he sent, him you do not believe. All right, so he said, I've witnessed, but that's just 1. John has witnessed, but we won't even count that. The works that I do are testimony that the Father witnesses to me. So we've got 4 at this point, if we were counting. And he said, but you don't accept any of them. You don't believe any of them. And then he calls another testimony. Who's that? Verse 30, or what is that? Verse 39. You search the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life, and these are they which testify of me. But you're not willing to come, that you may have life. I do not receive honor from men, but I know that you do not have the love of God in you. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me. If another comes in his own name, him you will receive. How can you believe who received honor from another and do not seek the honor that comes from the only God? All right, so you won't listen to the scriptures either. And here's the reason why. He gives insight into their motive. Who is Jesus trying to please? Who are they trying to please? Each other. They're trying to please each other. You seek the honor that comes from one another, and you do not seek the honor which comes from God. And that's the problem. That's the problem. So we go back. Why could these people not see the evidence clearly when others could see the evidence clearly? They were more concerned about Rabbi so-and-so and Pharisee so-and-so thinking well of them than what God thought about them. That is a very important thing to note. Timmy said something about how applicable this is to us. This is very applicable to us. When we start worrying more about whether I fit in with everybody around me and their beliefs rather than God's beliefs, we're in dangerous territory. Hopefully, Lord willing, those around us have the beliefs that are true. But our priority should still be, I'm looking to please God, not just the people around me. And as soon as our focus changes, then we become, well, here's the thing. You know what the problem I have with denominationalism? Denominationalism seeks to fit in with a group of people rather than saying, I'm following the Lord, whatever. And that's where our focus needs to be. I'm trying to please the Father. I'm trying to seek honor from the Father, not a group of people. Not a group of people. As soon as we start seeking favor from an honor from a group of people, what we do is we end up rejecting the truth on something and siding with them and become blind with it. And that's what these people are doing. You have, I covered quite a bit there.
You want to take the end right here?
Sure.
And I think there's one more witness here, and it's kind of within the scriptures. But he says, do not think I shall accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, in whom you trust. For if you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my word? So he connects it with his writings, and if you have read. But he's saying, I don't have to condemn you because Moses, who you actually believe, who you actually accept, he writes about me. So he condemns you himself, and he'll be the one doing the condemning since you want to accept him. Because he's saying, if you haven't accepted me, you haven't accepted the Father, so Moses will be the one to condemn you. So I think we can maybe include that within the scriptures, but you could tack on even one more witness there with Moses.
Do you feel like you follow the line of thinking here? We could spend more time on this because it is, pretty deep argument that Jesus is making here. But do you think you've got the idea of what Jesus is trying to get across to? All right. So, yes, sir.
Have you ever heard him use this story this way? Everybody there knew that they had to get in the water to keep this man in that. So, but I think that's what Jesus is doing. He's explaining that. Somebody might say, well, we don't have to get in the water to say.
Yeah. I've never heard anybody use that way. And I would say this, I would say the same thing that I would on the thief on the cross. And that is the Son of Man has the power to save when he's on earth. Yeah. Yeah. And so, and if that's what Jesus does for us, okay. But if he gives us instruction to follow, we better follow that instruction.
Those who've done good to the resurrection of life and those who've done evil. So there's a choice there.
Yes.
And he says here in verse 40 that you are not willing.
Yes.
So he's putting it back on. He's trying to get them to deal with it.
That's very good point. Very good point. Trying to get them to see they are not willing. They're making the choice to reject truth. All right, so now let's tie in some. We said this is more of a topical study tonight, dealing with Jesus's conflict with the Pharisees over the issue of the Sabbath. So let's look at some other occasions where there were conflict there. Let's flip over to Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12, verse 1. Matthew 12 and verse 1. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. So I want you to picture that they're walking through a grain field, and they reach out and they take some of the heads of the standing grain there. They rub it between their hands, blow off the chaff, take the kernels, throw it in their mouth, chew it up. Okay? And a Pharisee sees, whoa, 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 whoa. What are your disciples doing? They're doing what is unlawful. And it's like, well, what are you talking about? They are harvesting on the Sabbath day. Would you ever think of that as harvesting? That they got up and said, all right, it's a work day. Let's go harvest. No. And it kind of goes back to that idea, if you're wearing false teeth and you're eating with them, oh, you're grinding on, And so you look at this, and they had gotten very, very minute in their thinking on some of these things, so much so that they're losing the big picture in a lot of it. And so this sets up another discussion. So verse 3, then he said to them, have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but the priest only. You remember that story where David is fleeing from Saul, and he goes to Ahimelech there, Nob, and he says, "Do you have anything here?" And Ahimelech says, "No, we don't have anything but the holy bread, the showbread." And he says, "But if you have kept yourself pure, you can have it." And he gives it to him, and David takes it. Now, did the Pharisees have a big problem with David doing that? Doesn't seem. No, they did. David was their hero. They didn't seem to be throwing accusations at David for doing that. So Jesus said, but you've heard of that. Verse 5. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? What do the priests do on the Sabbath? They literally go to work. They clock in and go to work. But that's okay. Why is that okay? Because God told them to do that. God gave them that work to do on the Sabbath. So God gave one law that said no work on the Sabbath, but then he told the priest, you do have work to do on the Sabbath, and do it. Okay? Do they condemn the priest? No. All right. So what I think Jesus is doing here with these two stories is he says, boy, you're awful quick to condemn my disciples. But you don't condemn David when David violated a law that God had, because you like David a lot. And you don't bring these accusations against the priest because you recognize, well, the priest can do work on the Sabbath. So he's just bringing up this inconsistency in them in this. But then in verse 6, he says, but I say to you, in this place there is one greater than the temple. All right, so the Jews would say, well, the reason that they can do that is because they're working for the temple. And Jesus says, there's one greater than the temple that's here. Now, Jesus is using this subject about what can be done on the Sabbath as a springboard into who he is, because that's what they really need to understand. Who is this Jesus? And so he's bringing that into the focal point as this conversation continues. One other thing here in verse 7, I'll go ahead and finish 7 and 8, and then I'll turn it over to you. If you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the who. So were the disciples guilty of harvesting on the Sabbath day? No, they were not. But because the Jews had such especially the Pharisees had such a perspective on this, they could not see the innocence of that because of the traditions that they had set up, and they condemned the innocent. What about the laws about, he quotes from Hosea, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. What did God want their heart to be? Completely devoted to him. What qualities here? Merciful. Merciful. Here's the disciples are hungry and they're getting something to eat on the Sabbath day. They're not harvesting. They're not out bringing in their crops for the winter on this. But they didn't look through eyes of mercy. They looked through eyes of condemnation. And Jesus says, you really need to learn what that means. You really need to learn what that means on that.
Isaiah passage, I think, follows it up and said, knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. So they have knowledge, but they don't have the knowledge of God. They're not using that.
Very good.
I think it's interesting they condemn them here for doing this, for harvesting, when it seems like they're just trying to get a snack for energy because they're hungry. But I think if you go back and look at the law, and hopefully I'm interpreting this the right way, but passages like the end of Deuteronomy 24, where it says you should leave some of this for the sojourner. So here sojourners are coming along and maybe getting what they're entitled to. And yet they're saying you're breaking the law. When actually the law says no, they can do this. So it's interesting. Maybe their hypocrisy is speaking for them without trying to acknowledge what the law is saying. But I love that last verse, for the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath. So Jesus is, just like Craig was saying earlier, trying to help them understand the bigger picture here and who he is and how he's connected to all these things. And I don't think Jesus is somebody like David or like the priests who maybe have God's permission or an excuse or are excused for this moment. But Jesus is saying, I'm the very foundation of where this came from. You know, I am part of who gave this law. I'm Lord over it. So I think I guess one thing to say about that is, if anybody should know the law and what is breaking it and what is not breaking it, it's me. I'm the one who it came by. And so it's silly for them to even challenge Jesus on this if they were really trying to understand who he was.
And y'all may have said this, but he's the one that he made the law. So he's
Yeah,
Lord of the Sabbath.
that's right. So they're making all of these regulations about it, but they're making it in ignorance. He knows what was intended by it. Very good.
I heard mercy divine is hold back punishment that is deserved. If you read it that way, he says, if you knew what mercy meant, you would have held back that condemnation.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, there's one more. We'll try to squeeze this in here, and we'll just continue on down in this, and we'll flip over to Mark maybe for a few more details. When he had departed from there, he went into a synagogue, and behold, there was a man who had a withered hand, and they asked him, saying whether it was lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not. Why? Why were they asking him this? We really want to know. We want to be clear what God's will is. Is it okay to heal on the Sabbath? Now, we already know that it would be wrong to do so. We're asking you, hoping you'll give the wrong answer and we can accuse you. That's what's in their heart here. So going back to the idea of mercy, mercy is not in their heart in any way on this. Okay, now I want to flip over to Mark's account because we have a detail there in Matthew we'll turn back to, but in Mark's account, I think it gives a little bit fuller picture of this. So go over to Mark chapter 3. And in Mark chapter 3, verse 1, it said, he entered the synagogue, and a man there was with the withered hand, and they watched him closely as to whether he would heal him on the Sabbath so that they might accuse him. So there's a little bit. And Jesus said to the man who had the withered hand, step forward, step forward. So Jesus says, all right, y'all are watching. Y'all want to know about this? Let's just get this out in the open. Come here. Come here. So the guy steps forward. And he said to him, says to the people, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? Is that a tough question? What do they say? Nothing. We're not answering that one. No, we're not answering that one. All right. Now back over in Matthew's account, you can stay there if you want. Jesus said in verse 11, what man is there among you who has one sheep, and if he falls into a pit on the Sabbath, would not lay hold of it and lift it out? And they would all be like, well, yeah, we would do that. Or how much more value is a man than a sheep? And then he answers their question. Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. You want to know? Yes, it is lawful. So there's your answer. Now, can we believe Jesus or not? Are we sure that his answer is from God? We're about to find out. So when he had looked around at them in anger, being grieved at the hardness of their heart, he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored as whole as the other. Remember, this was a withered hand, and now it's functional, whole again. Everybody takes a collective gasp. He must be speaking God's will. No, 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 no. The Pharisees went out immediately and plotted with the Herodians against him how they might destroy him. What's the problem here? Looking for truth? No. Hardness of the heart, not looking for truth. And so you see the problem here. We're out of time. We'll pick up there next time. Thank you for your good attention. Appreciate the good comments.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.